stinking mic. My name's Paul Cozell. I'm the director of the Sonic Arts Center, and I'm really pleased that all of you guys found your way here to City College, to the recital hall, and I want to welcome you to the inaugural event in the Off the Record with Scott Hull, and today's guests are going to be two guys from the bunker, and Scott's going to introduce them to you. We are very pleased to have you here, and stay tuned because this is going to become a regular thing here at the college, partnering with Masterdisk. So without any further ado, I want to introduce our MC, Scott Hull.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. This is a great crowd. I'm just going to have a couple notes here standing by just so I remember to say what I want to say. So I want to explain a little bit about what we're doing here. The advertisement and the announcement for the event wasn't really clear about what we're going to do here. Off the Record, I think, I've been looking at as a series of events that presents kind of a unique way of learning some of the behind the scenes, some of the not often talked about parts of the music making, record making process. One important fact is that in the past, producers and engineers learned this craft by apprenticing with their colleagues, with their senior engineers. Today, most of the learning, though, is really done in a classroom, online, or self-taught through textbooks and with the guidance of a program like this. But what is missing, I feel like, is the collaboration, the peer groups, and really mentorship. You'll hear us talk about this over and over again this evening, I think. Off the Record, though, isn't a sales pitch, disguised as a workshop. We'll talk about the gear, we'll talk about the setups, we might even talk about the specific manufacturers that we like and things, but it's really not meant to be an endorsement or a sales pitch. It's really about you guys, girls, women, getting a chance to hear the way professional audio people talk about their craft. I just really want the content to be real and true. I want it not to be kind of cloaked by endorsements. One thing that brought me to the idea of doing this is that during my mastering sessions, the session's completed, everybody's happy. We just, finished. The record's done. It's usually a bit of an elation process that people go through. They're either panicked that now they got to figure out how to sell it, or they're very happy that it's done. They put a lot of effort into it. But these spontaneous conversations erupt in my room when the work's done, and we've got a little bit of extra time. These aren't so much tell-alls. We're not really getting involved in that kind of stuff, but it's the kind of information that I feel like used to be handed down from generation to generation, from senior engineer to junior engineer. It's, by the way, if you're in a professional session, it's a really great time to ask those sort of questions that you're dying to know the answer to when the pressure's off and when the product's delivered and people are kind of decompressing a little bit after the session. But I want to bring that kind of environment here. So that's what my point is. Hopefully these events will inspire you to your own personal greatness. I hope you take these stories and ideas and some of the concepts that you've learned here and share them with other people. Innovate in music in your own way. And as I like to say, kind of dream big, inside and outside of the box. So I'm really hoping that we touch on some things that are really meaningful for you today. I suggest that you listen, think, and imagine. Well, that seems kind of easy. Maybe we should try it that way. Or would really be kind of, how could we make this more fun for the musicians to record? Because I find invariably that when we think about enjoyment, when we think about the musicians having fun, the music sounds better. The music is all about that. I'm really thrilled to be here. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I'd like to know a little bit about the makeup of the group, so I'm going to ask a few questions. I've gathered that most of you are engineering students are involved in the process, but how many are students of in the recording, or would consider yourself sort of beginners, amateur recording people kind of stuff? Is that about 3/4 of the crowd? Almost the entire crowd. Great. Pros, people who, I know you, have their own facilities, or actually, been out in the world and about, performers, or, okay, great. We've got 2 or 3 people. With that, though, I would like to attempt an introduction of my guests. So, first person I'd like to introduce you to is John Davis. I've worked with John on many wonderful sounding records. John is one of the owners of Bunker Studio in Williamsburg, The Bunker. They all sound live and interesting and eclectic, kind of pop, funk, soul, and acoustic, wide variety of different types of styles, but always having an eclectic and acoustic reality to them that I enjoy. It's always a pleasure having his production sort of unfold for me in the mastering studio. So, come on down, John. But what caught me, what was a little confusing is that I wanted to see, who John Davis was. And I went online and have a seat, I'll join you in just a second. So a little Wikipedia, a little Google search, and I found out that John Davis might be an English explorer from 1550, or John Davis, an American film producer in the 70s, a songwriter from Tennessee who founded Superdrag, or a weightlifter who won super heavyweight gold medal in 1948 and 52.
That's possible.
A classical pianist, age 55, a politician and diplomat born in 73, a governor of Massachusetts in 1787, a sculptor born in 36, and a film director in 53. So that's just the first page of the Google link. So I sent out a link to that. Like, who are you guys? Yeah. I know a lot about their music, but I didn't know much about their background. So this is going to be fun because I'm going to be discovering that as well tonight. My next guest is John's partner at the Bunker, Nevezie. Fortunately for Aaron, his name's a little more unique. But like John, I've enjoyed dozens of Aaron's productions and mixes while I've been mastering them. Aaron and I have a lot of performers and artists and musical tastes in common. And while his style may be linked with catchphrases like modern jazz, avant-garde, and such, I think there's a lot more to Aaron's work that meets the ear. So welcome to everyone, and let's see where we go from there. So hi, guys. Hi. So, John, everybody kind of wants to know, always ask the first question, how did you get started? Where did you begin? So I'm going to do it differently. Where are you now? Who's John? All right. The real John Davis, please stand up.
Well, I'm, Aaron and I are in Williamsburg running the Bunker and working every day, doing sessions and still doing construction to finish it and painting and all the glamorous
I love the stories. I love the stories of you guys up on the ladders and the hammers and building it, really building it yourself. Yeah. It looks great. It doesn't look home built. It really doesn't.
Yeah, but that's.
How between the two of you, how many projects do you work on in a year? What kind of volume are we talking about?
It depends if you're talking like production projects as opposed to just recording,
Well,
or
just
engineering
all
or
projects.
mixing.
You get engaged to really work on a music project.
Between us, probably a good couple of hundred.
That's what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I wanted them to hear that it was really quite a lot of work.
I think that's because the definition of what a project is different. People come in to do one song, or just to track drums for 2 songs, or it's not always full album.
What attracts your artists, your clients? And I'd like you both to answer this because I think it's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. What attracts your clients to you? Why would somebody choose Aaron to work on a project? And this it's got a little method to my madness. It'll lead us to some other ideas as well.
It's a good question. I think people come to us because of other people we've worked with 90% of the time. We've both kind of, we've kind of built our careers in a very parallel fashion. We opened the studio together. We kind of worked individually on, our own sort of home studios before we brought it all together for the first iteration of the bunker. And, it's kind of always been a very organic process of just working with artists, them telling artists that they've worked with, hey, I had a great experience. You guys should call Aaron or John and record with them. And it's that simple of just, the network expands, and, we'd always find that we'd do a bunch of records and maybe it'd slow down for a month or two, and then all of a sudden those records would come out and we'd reach a whole other circle of clients, and it's probably exactly the same for you as well.
Yeah.
So, so the reason people come and work with me is just, I think, purely just my reputation via word of mouth, and the records that have gone out and spoken for themselves.
How do you approach? We're going to drill a little deeper. How do you think you approach a project differently than another producer or another engineer?
I don't know if I do. I think everybody should, or I think good producers kind of approach things in a very similar way. They may go for different results, or they may be hearing something completely different, but I think the approach is going to be really similar. Is you just want to help the artist realize their vision. Sometimes the artist knows what they want more than others, and sometimes you have to draw it out of them. And so sometimes your role is going to be completely different for every project, or not completely different, but there's going to be differences in every project. So, but you're basically doing the same job every day. You're trying to make something that sounds good, make people comfortable in the studio, make them do the best work that they can do, and help them get there.
Right. With you, what's in common? I always find it really interesting to look back at the work that I've done over a few years, and try to, because the patterns don't emerge until you're looking at a volume of work. Probably like yourself, the way you described the work, I don't really choose the work that I work on. Quite often it chooses me, and so that I find out after the fact, like, wow, I've done a whole bunch of records that sound like John Mayer. It really didn't mean to, but that work kind of finds you because they read cuts and things like that. But what did you or the bunker in general? Do you feel you have a niche? Because I think I've seen one in your work, but I was curious what your thinking was.
Yeah, I think building on what Aaron said, that one of the big things is the fact that we're both musicians. We're not just engineers, and so we're known for people that we play with or circles we play in. And one of the it's definitely not the only type of music I like to do, but there's definitely a lot of stuff that I've done because of my work with my band Nerve and with JoJo. So there's a lot of drummers who are intimately familiar with, things that I've recorded and engineered, and want to sound something like that. So that's definitely part of it. There's a lot of music I do that's not in the electronic world, but.
Right. I think if you're going to talk about like maybe a niche that we've occupied, and I think Scott mentioned it in your introduction to us, like maybe just the element of acousticness. The fact that we are both musicians who have played acoustic music.
Right. I'll say that's where I really. I know a lot of engineers and producers are musicians first and foremost, but there's a very musical character about your work. So I was hoping we kind of get to that point.
Yeah. I think it's just, we talk about this all the time too, is, after sessions or before sessions or sessions we've heard other people work on, and it's just the fact of, as a musician, you know what it sounds like on the bandstand, you know what you want to hear, you know what it feels like to stand next to an upright bass player or an electric bass player or in front of a guitar amp.
Yeah, or a kick drum with side fills.
Yeah.
And if you haven't done it, then you can't pretend. It's like.
So your formative years, both as musicians, what are some of the highlights? Sort of some of your. Well, to go all the way back to the cradle, but what's some of the what are some of the turning points that kind of got you to the idea that producing records and then eventually owning a recording studio to do that? Because we've got literally have a room full of people that I would probably would like to know how to become you guys.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Take some construction classes.
I swear to God, I've come really close this year to going to get my HVAC certification.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I've spent so much time working on the air conditioning system in the studios.
Yeah.
I get it wrong every time.
Mastering and HVAC.
Yeah.
I like that.
It makes
It'd fit on a
sense.
card.
Well, I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I might as well learn what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
I thought would be curious to see because the music industry blossomed a number of years ago, and there's been a lot of changes, a lot of reorganizations. How's your workload been over the past few years? Has this been a growing trend?
Yeah, constantly increasing, pretty much.
The bunker started initially where?
We were initially in the same neighborhood in Williamsburg, but it was a basement that used to be an apartment that grew out of John and I and another friend of ours. We lived there and we recorded in our bedrooms and ran cables under doors and started doing our
That
first
sounds familiar.
vocals in the bedroom while somebody else is working on a project down the hallway. So that grew into a studio and
As a business owner, I'm always fascinated. What made you decide? What was the leap of faith, the moment that you guys had outgrown it and really wanted to move to something else?
to the new space.
Yeah.
That was
The new space was just outgrowing it a million.
I mean,
times over.
what was the? From my experience, there's almost always an event where it's like we would have gotten that project if we had a bigger live room.
We had a couple would have gotten that project if we had a B room.
You're so busy.
Yeah, we had to say no to like the Esperanza Spalding record.
Yeah, I missed that one. Q-tip.
Yeah. So that was.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That stuff kind of hits you between the eyes.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, we've got, we can play it safe for only so long, and then you really have to take a leap of faith into the next step, next realm. But you didn't, and this is advice I got years ago, to not build in anticipation of that work. Really, wait until they're knocking your doors down, and then figure out a fast, cheap way to expand.
You got a cheap one?
Wow. Should have called you before we moved. Yeah. I mean, I think for us it was definitely just that, and just in terms of the space we were in, just wasn't going to be ever going to be a professional recording, like a really professional recording studio. Just we didn't have control of our environment. Yeah. There was water pouring from the ceiling in the control rooms when somebody upstairs wouldn't clean it.
Like putting towels over the tape
Oh,
machine.
that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Like so, at that point, that was one of the moments that I said to John, I was like, we gotta go.
Yeah, wiping water off the Studer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It still works.
I don't know how many have done the background with these guys. Is very analog-oriented recording studio. Not all analog, obviously, but combination of some great analog stuff, but certainly analog. I love the story of because I could relate to it completely directly of your early. Sort of the inspirational moment of your early.
4-tracking.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, well, my parents work at a private high school in Connecticut out in the country, and has a pretty good music department. Nothing spectacular, but they, I would always go and mess around. Gave me the opportunity to learn to play drums when I was 8 years old without having to try and get a drum set or know someone. In one of the closets I found a Tascam 234 4-track machine, the rack mount 4-track, and that was when I was probably 10 or 12, I don't know, and taught myself how to use that, which was with no manual, which was kind of interesting to figure out what a sync head, the difference between a sync head and a playback head when you're 10 takes a little while to figure out why nothing comes back in time. So that was probably.
I love it. I love it. Just the exploration. So we both admitted to me that you're pretty much self-taught in the engineering aspect of the thing. So obviously you got some help along the way. You grew and your skills evolved. Tell us about where that came from.
I mean, for me, I kind of started in a very similar place of just 4-track in it when I was at high school, you know, trying to record my rock band at high school and all that stuff with my 4-track. And then, you know, I kind of forgot about that for a few years as just working on being a musician. You know, I kind of left that behind a lot. But then we both went to school together for a minute at the new school, and I had a friend who was running the recording program there, and he needed a sub one day. And I really hadn't been recording much for a long time, and I think we had, you know, you were doing some stuff with a friend of ours,
Yeah.
like this amazing electronic musician, and John was mixing stuff with him and making tracks. And so I think I was kind of in that stage, but he just kind of threw me in the deep end, and it was like, here's this ensemble, here's a Mackie, you know, go and yeah, here's the mics, put them up, you know, turn on phantom power, and the condenser mics will work, and away you go. And you know, it was live to 2-track stuff. So that was my first kind of training. Really, it's you know, recording student ensembles, live to 2-track, to DAT. You know, no recall, nothing. You know, it's just like you print it, and if the teacher didn't like it, they yell at you, and you're stuck with it.
Am I correct? I mean, do you agree with me that opportunities like that still exist? That situations where you can just...
I'm
yeah.
sure there's here.
I mean, all
there's
schools
jazz
probably
program.
have, you know.
I mean, you know, from their perspective, you know, how to. It's sometimes difficult or unfortunate if it doesn't seem like the path that the professionals took is there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, this is grassroots. This is you know, you build it and
You can get hours and hours of recording experience in really horrible situations and make it work. And that's
Yeah.
how you get really good and really fast.
yeah.
And we've also both done a lot of live sound.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of live sound work in the city, and that'll get your problem-solving chops up real quick.
Yeah.
You know, when it's
That's
a
probably
jazz festival and there's no bass mic, and you have to run on stage and, you know, retrace signals and figure out why you're not getting bass.
I was at Tanglewood last summer with a Steely Dan concert, and I was actually way back out on the lawn, not paying too much attention to the performance, talking to the guy, a friend of mine who had invited me, who he coordinates the recording program there, and all of a sudden, it was coming out of the speakers, and he was like, "What the heck was that?" And Donald stopped playing.
Yeah.
In the middle of you know, Hey 19,
see
he just
that.
stopped playing. He said, "Folks, you paid too much for these tickets. You're going to have to get the sound right before I'm going to go on."
Wow.
And he stopped and got up and walked. And it was, you know, and it wasn't this guy's job to go fix it, but he was like, "Whoa, somebody's."
Some sound guy sweating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because they brought in some outside people. It wasn't his goons. He calls them his goons. They're well-trained students.
Yeah. Running Steely Dan tonight. Awesome.
But it's yeah. These they define you. These moments sort of define you.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, there's a gap between where you guys are now and then, you know. Well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Is there a gap from the sort of beginnings to when it became obvious that you started amassing equipment and started recording?
I mean, it's been a pretty organic evolution, you know, throughout. There was never like you said, like a if you build it, they will come kind of mentality, because we've all seen that fail a million times in New York, where someone just decided like, oh, I can lease an SSL and rent this space, and everyone's going to record with me, and then you hear about some new studio in an AES newsletter, and then 3 months later it has a different name.
Yeah.
And, you know, then it's gone, and then it's, you know.
The gear shows up on a used gear list.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, it kind of always evolved to what it, kind of what it's a supply and demand. You know, the more we did more good work, the more people called us.
Right.
And the more we just tried to put whatever we could back into the business and grow it. And
That's great. For me, the challenge was understanding business, not so much even the music business, but just business.
Yep.
I think you got to have a dozen horror stories, because I tripped over myself repeatedly.
I mean, I think for us, we've been super lucky just in terms of keeping it simple as being our whole motto in our business. And we didn't start a business as strangers as well. You know, John and I have been good friends for a long time. We had toured together, we had played music together, we'd kind of recorded music forever.
lived together for years.
Yeah, exactly,
so-
roommates. And So it was like, at the time, it was like, let's start a business. It was like, okay, cool. We know what we want to do. We have very similar aims in life and in music.
Taste
and
and
yeah, exactly.
Oh, that's great.
So we just kept it really simple, and that's kind of been our motto, and we're just trying to keep it as simple into the future as it gets way more complicated, but still trying to find like the through line of just not overstretching ourselves, not trying to do too much, and not doing something
That's
that
probably
would get
really
confusing.
smart. That's somewhat the opposite of my approach. It's to make things as complicated as possible, and then figure out what I did, how to get caught up with my concepts. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you find yourself there, look for some advice, get some
Professional
help.
help.
Well, that's great. What are and talk a little bit about the creative stuff and involved with musicians in the studio. Like what kind of stories come to mind of working in the studio and things happen spontaneously and brush with greatnesses here or there. Any ideas?
I'm trying to think. I mean,
I'll let you think, and then I'll ask him a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
What mistakes? What do bands, let's just say bands. What mistakes do they just seem to always make? I'd see it at the final end of the production, but what mistakes are you kind of wish you could tell to bands like.
I think I got the easy question.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely things that seem to occur, and I'm sure, John, you chip in too. It's always, so much of it's in the arrangement. And as a producer and as an engineer, and you see it all the time with people who are not as experienced in the studio, and they come in, and even with experienced session musicians as well, they come in and people are playing too much, or they're not listening, or it's all the stuff you always hear. It's just true. Not making space, not thinking for the song rather than thinking for yourself rather than the song. All those things just happen all the time, and so I think a lot of our job as producers is to just try to find the important stuff and help people find that and bring it out and get rid of all the stuff that's not necessary. And that's in terms of musical arrangement, song arrangement. There's always like so many times people come in and they bring a song and you're like, well, why is that intro 16 bars long? They're like, oh, well, it's always been 16 bars long. On my demo it was 16 bars long. You're like, well, I'm bored. Can we get to the verse or whatever it is, or maybe let's put the chorus first, or why is it always acoustic guitar starting every song? There's just habits, I guess.
One of the things that absolutely has been a boon for independent music has been the ability for everyone to sort of record anything, anywhere, and be able to put very creative music together, very unique projects, things that probably wouldn't be able to even fund to get into a recording studio. But there's a huge gap in this role of producer. And I think even maybe in this group of people who really understand the music recording process or the process of learning about it, I think maybe there's a misunderstanding of what the role of the producer really was. I mean, should be. I'd love any thoughts you have in this matter. It's a passion of mine to figure out kind of what the disconnect is, because there's just the fact that you can record it doesn't mean it's going to turn out well, and there's a lot of
for anybody. Yeah.
Who makes a good producer?
Sorry, I was still thinking about the other question.
I'm sorry.
I got stuck. That's good. No, I think I'm sure there's exceptions to all these rules, but I think for the most part, people who are good producers are, there's a bunch of things you have to be able to do. You have to be able to communicate, you have to be able to listen, you have to be able to sort of read people and how they're going to respond to things. Some people, after the first playback, you can just go right for what they're doing and be like, no, don't do that. Some people you do that, they're going to fall apart and walk out of the studio. Yeah. So you really have to be able to read the psyche of the musicians, and a lot of that comes from, for us, being in bands, being around musicians, when you're in bands with people and you know it, then you recognize, you're like, oh, he's like okay, he's like that guy.
He's the guy you can't suggest something to because he's going to freak out.
Yeah, he's gonna take it personally about the hi-hat, the open hi-hat. So you have to think of a really nice way to get rid of the hi-hat instead of just saying the hi-hat it's loud and bright and sounds stupid. Some guys will be like, oh, okay, cool, I'll play the rim and the floor tom. They're not gonna, and other guys are gonna be like, but I've been doing it,
Yeah.
Get really sad.
Well, I'm fascinated with the earlier time of recording where the house producer was assigned by the label and the band was produced. This is just an era that we don't really see, but produced amazing results. People that knew the craft of the recording environment so well. Are either of you guys familiar with the group called the Wrecking Crew? The California session musician guys. This is just a little plug for them because they're working really hard to put this video together. We got a sneak preview of it in San Fran a few weeks ago at the Audio Engineering Society, and I've heard about them, but the footage they're putting together.
I would love to see that.
It was just Tommy Tedesco and Carol Kay and bass, and these players were just insane. And then the print that they put on all this different music, if you don't have no idea who I'm talking about, write this down and look up the Wrecking Crew. They've even got some outtakes and stuff on their website, so it's really groovy.
Yeah.
How do you convince a band that they need a producer? You guys are producers. This is obviously what you have to.
I think sometimes you convince them, sometimes you just end up with that job. Sometimes people come to you to be the producer, and then you have, you can work it through from the beginning and, go to rehearsals, and that sometimes you get a crew coming into the studio and they just need help, and as engineers, we're producers as well, but sometimes you get hired as an engineer, but you just end up being a producer by default because nobody else is doing it, and you want to make a good product. And you want people leaving happy, and if they get a better product, they're probably going to leave happy.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, every once in a while a band will come through that doesn't need one. That just really knows what, that actually can self-produce, but that's few and far.
It really is that rare.
Between.
I've noticed, because there's it's almost impossible to be objective. You really have to revere folks like Prince or whomever that can actually perform and produce in a very competent sort of way. That objectivity it seems impossible.
Well, I think that is such a huge thing, and also just as a producer, and John sort of touched on this too, is like your role is going to be so different with every band. Like some bands don't need you arranging the music because they've got it, they're great musicians, they've thought it through. Maybe they need one suggestion here or there, or maybe you can be like, hey, why don't we use this guitar amp because it's going to sound cooler, or let's try this pedal, or like you can be a sonic producer maybe. And then sometimes your role is just to be like, that's a great take, done, or let's do another take because you were dragging or whatever it is. Yeah. And then sometimes your producer is, you're getting in there and arranging all the songs.
Playing
and
half the instruments.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll produce records that John will play drums and bass and guitar and keyboards and do everything.
We know we know why the members of the band get uncomfortable when someone's going to replace them, but there's an art, there's a particular skill to playing in the studio. That isn't the same thing as playing in the band. That isn't the same thing. There's quite clearly, quite honestly, the musicians that do amazing stage work, don't necessarily translate, to great session work.
Yeah, and then that's the role as the producer, is to like understanding the instruments enough to be able to guide them to, be able to say, hey, why don't you play like this? Or as a guitar player, be like, try this guitar pick, and it changes everything. And there's these little small things that you learn from doing it so much that as a player, and since John's like a great bass player but also a great drummer, he can sit down on the drum kit and play it for somebody. But he also knows how to tune a drum kit really well, so he's going to be like, hey, give me a second, I'm going to tune the snare drum, and all of a sudden something sounds great, or fix a problem. And I think that's one of the things, is if they're not as studio friendly, then they can help them out.
I think this is really skills in common with other great producers that I've known, is that they're very multi-talented, very, very know enough about most of the instruments in the session to be almost able to pick them up and demonstrate if necessary.
And that's also really important, just making people feel comfortable when they walk in. and be like, oh, hey, you're playing that guitar. That's great. I love those guitars. And because we're just talking about the technical side, but
Totally wanted to get into the psychology
Yeah.
of getting getting a band to perform, artists to be able to perform like that.
Mhm. Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah, they want to feel like they're just hanging out with some other musicians or whatever. Then they play great. When it's like, oh, cool, you've got what year is that jazz bass? Oh, I have a '76 jazz bass. Awesome. You know, and then all of a sudden you're on their side.
Yeah.
You're not like, oh, is that passive? You know, or like some weird, I don't know what engineers think about, you know, like, it's like, oh, you know, you're not putting them like, oh, maybe he doesn't like my bass, or maybe he's like, you know, and even being like, oh, we got some, you know, that's cool about yours. We got, you know, Aaron's P bass and my jazz bass are in the closet, so you can grab them if you want to check out some other.
I suspect you've heard the students address to the crowd here for a little bit, that you've heard the professors talk about this and probably downplayed the importance of what we're really talking about here, the psychology of the recording session. They're not even telling you half of it. It's I met with a friend this morning who told me about working with very difficult performers, very difficult artists, and actually was having so much trouble dealing with these people that were just total divas, total prima donna people. Then I said, well, how do I solve this problem? He went and found a book. How to work with difficult people. And he said it changed his whole outlook on it. It literally changed the way. And I could coin the phrase, it's really, even though the client is wrong, sometimes it's totally okay for the client to be right. For them to, you're right, that those two guitars are out of tune. They take them, you know, go tune them again. You know, it's a 5-minute distraction, but you've given the person some space, some acknowledged their worth and their involvement. Find it more gratifying, engineering or producing specifically? You guys sound like you combine those two skills really all the time.
yeah.
I think that's what working in the studio is now. You know, I think we both came up post the era of the commercial studio, and there's still a couple. I mean, you can totally go get a job at Avatar, and you will probably end up engineering sessions, but there's not a lot of people who are going to get those jobs. There's not a lot of places to go once you get up 1 or 2 rungs. That's it. There's not you're not going to, it's a different thing now. It's better to do it yourself. You know, I think that's why we're able to engineer and produce. Right. You know, it's
in the results though as well. I mean, clients are happy, and I've noticed. I've worked with you both for a number of years, and I've noticed product is getting better, and the kind of thinking about it. The projects are more defined, and I've got a great question for Aaron. I do a fair amount, as you know, of interesting music as well, and my mastering avant-garde, modern music. I mean, we all do. I mean, I'm not really. But I find the engineers that I work with, and even sometimes my clients, will hear some of the interesting sound music coming out of my speakers, and the question is almost invariably, how do you know what it's supposed to sound like when it's doesn't sound like anything you've ever really heard before? Yeah. I mean, I have an answer for that from a mastering perspective, but when you're beginning a project that isn't representational, it's not. Where do you start?
I think the really easy answer is you ask the musicians what they want to sound like. I mean, because I could make them sound a bunch of different ways, but I think that's the key to everything, but especially in music you're not familiar with, or an instrument you're not familiar with. I mean, it can be the craziest out stuff, but in that case, most of your job is just to capture the craziness. Just try to make it translate, and again, I think it's just the experience of having done so many different things for so many years that you get used to just being like, okay, cool, that's kind of getting it quicker. Like maybe you don't even have to ask the musician specifically, but you get what they do because you hear the guitar player setting up and he's got it's Nels Cline, he's got a bunch of crazy pedals and whatever, and he's going to make some sounds and it's going to be amazing. And so he's like, well, cool, my job is just to capture that. Yeah. I don't have to do anything. Like a lot of the time, most of that stuff, you don't have to do anything. Because they know what they want, they're going to do it, and you just help them capture it. I do find that
they've, as random as it sounds, it's actually, they're pretty well thought out.
Yeah. Like those people are conceptual artists, they're not just making crazy noises. They know exactly what they're trying to do, and so if you're doing an improv session with people who are going to sit down and play for 4 hours, and they're going to come back and listen. They're going to be, that's good, that's bad. You know, it's not my judgment at that point. I just have to capture it.
It's an interesting, kind of role change, because when in the pop realm or in, maybe more representational music, even if it's jazz or whatever, there's our opinions kind of factor in a little more heavily, and then at times you really need to be comfortable stepping away from that, or being ready, almost ready at a moment's notice to have an opinion, but not necessarily dominating the conversation. My response to that is the music almost always tells me a story.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
It's when I don't have anybody to ask. Even if it's in another language, the lyrics I don't understand. I mean, I can recognize a love, a new love, a lost love, and a just let's party, song in about 40 different languages.
Well, I think, and this is one of the things.
Most of the songs.
Yeah,
That's all. That's all there really is. How many different songs are there?
Yeah,
it's all three.
Yeah, all three emotions. I mean, I think that's one of the things for me and John, why we work with you as well, is because we don't have to explain it. And that's, I think hopefully what we do for our clients is what you can do for us as a mastering engineer. Is like a lot of time we'll send stuff out and it's to other people sometimes, and it comes back and they didn't get it. And I think one of the coolest experiences as a producer and engineer is that Laura Alt record I sent you, and you sent me 2 different versions of the record because you're like, I want to know what it is. And you sent it to me, and I listened to it. I was like, "It's that," and you're like, "Cool, got it." Now I know what the rest of the record is, and that was a hard record, I'm sure, to work through.
It doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
But I could hear it going both ways. You just sent me a project recently that I kind of pulled one direction, the Motown.
Right, that thing, yeah. That funny cover.
Funny covers of Motown stuff. But it's the sound sort of let me in one direction, but the client wanted it in another direction. And when Holt gave me some feedback, I was like, well, yeah, of course. If you want it over on that side of the line, I wasn't over there. I was over here.
Yeah.
I thought, it sounded good for what I had in my head, but that kind of comes up.
Yeah.
Where it's one of the interesting things is that you usually don't get. I either get very, very small revisions, or it's like all wrong.
It's all, the other thing. Yeah.
It's like completely, from the whole wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think actually both of those subjects is kind of why we're even here. I mean, understanding the intent, and B, the kind of abstract stuff, because the first project that we heard that we knew was something we'd worked on that was mastered was A.L. Mayoz's ADOM record, which I engineered and mixed, and that was a really weird sounding record. Because A.L. has a million pedals. It almost seems like he doesn't know what he's doing with them, but somehow it works.
Draws the craziest, coolest sounds out of
through a little Galen Kruger solid state practice amp. Like, he didn't want to use a real amp. That was his sound. So I had an amp this big with 2 U87s on each speaker that were dwarfed the amp, and the drummer wanted it to sound like an 80s dance record, and the bass player wanted as much low end as possible. And then it came back, and it sounded perfect.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, great.
Who is this mastering?
Yeah, I was like, who is this Scott Hull?
Wild and crazy.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about. I love the thinking about experience as being a bunch of experiences. I mean, it's not so much that I've just made a bunch of records. It's that I've had experiences with a really wide number of people. That's one of the both selling points and frustrations sometimes about in mastering. We generally polish off a record in a day, and so that's a lot of music. I mean, you guys are talking collectively, a couple of hundred records. It's not unusual for me to do 250 records in a year. Yeah. And it's just a lot of music to process.
Coming through,
Paul here asked me to put together a sample reel to play as you guys were coming in, and it was like, oh, well, what decade do I start with? It's literally so much music, and I don't mean it. Don't mean it egotistically. It's just, it's really fun to go back and listen to stuff you've done before and not hate it. When you go back,
it's a really good feeling.
And there's a consistency, and there's an artistry that you kind of recognize, even if it's a little bit different. Jay Masca's record that I hadn't heard in a long time that I mastered in 90 or something, and I was like, whoa, well, I wouldn't have done it quite that way today, but it was cool. Yeah, it was really cool. Is there any questions for these guys? I'm going to keep asking, but you know, if something is interesting, if you want to dive in, please let me know. Sure. We got mic runner.
Whichever comes to mind first. Most enjoyable session or the oddest session?
Obvious.
Oddest.
Oddest.
I think, I had this really cool one actually that was possibly the craziest session I've done, which I did a few months ago for this drummer called Mike Pride, and he had this,
Oh yeah.
hey, Mike?
I love. Yeah.
Your Mike's amazing.
Yeah.
He has this piece, it's a 30-minute piece called Drummer's Corpse, and it features 7 drummers, guitar, additional percussion, 3 vocalists, and maybe a couple of other things. So, 7 drummers, and that's live.
Yeah.
So what we did was we set up 4 drums. We couldn't. I was like, look, we're not going to be able to set up. We don't have that many drums.
Or mics.
Or microphones. Yeah. So we set up 7 drummers. We set up 4 drummers for the first lot. We did a run through of the track. He laid down like a percussion thing of some stuff, and then it was like 5-minute sections. 5-minute section, 5-minute section, 30 minutes long. And then we brought in the first 4 drummers. They played for 30 minutes straight. Cleared those guys out, brought in the next 3 drummers, and some amazing drummers, you know, Bobby Previtt and Chess Smith, and Tyshawn was there. And it's a great crew of people, and Mike was playing, and then they played for 30 minutes straight. They didn't hear the other 4 drummers that had played on it, and then we listened to it, 7 drummers, just this wall. It was beautiful, though, and there's this amazing logic. I'm talking about conceptual, you know, people. He had this concept for this piece. He knew exactly what he wanted. He got these people to do a crazy thing, and there's a beauty in it there.
It's all charted. Were they playing parts? Or
No, it had 5 minutes. They took an idea for 5 minutes. Then they play another idea for 5 minutes, and they play another idea for
Well,
5
he would
minutes.
like scream into a mic.
It's
Cue
time to
the I mean,
change.
it was a pretty mayhem.
Oh, that was a crazy session. And also, halfway through the last run through, after they did like the 7 drummers, we had another run through with like some like really crazy vocalists like screaming and freaking out, and it sounded like it was an insane asylum, and like literally it was kind of scary. And then halfway through that, the guitar cut out, and I was like, what the hell happened to the guitar? And I kind of ran out there, and the amp, I was just like, I don't know where the guitar went. I just couldn't figure it out. And I was just like, it was working perfectly. And then after the session, I'm going and winding up cables, and I wind up one cable, and it's just cut in half. And he'd dropped a cymbal on the cable that was running to the guitar amp. It's just cut in half by a cymbal. So that was the oddest session probably, but it was so much fun. It's really cool. What was the other one? Most memorable or something? What was the other question?
Well, it was whichever came
Oh,
to mind
funnest?
first.
I know you take the other.
When you enjoyed most, or
Yeah.
the
I
strangest.
don't know. There have been a
Tune
lot.
Yards was fun.
The Tune Yard session was really fun with
Yeah.
Questlove. That
Yeah.
was just amazing to watch. I mean,
Yeah.
getting into like the really great players and really great singers is kind of where, like you were asking me earlier, I guess the things that are really like amazing moments when you're sitting and you can just be like, oh, yeah. It's usually when you don't have to do anything. It's like when, you know, Joey Barron sits down behind the drum set and does this, and you push up the overheads and it sounds like your favorite record, Joey Barron's on. You're like, oh, this is easy.
Yeah.
I know why.
Like, yeah, I know why.
they hired
You know,
him for
or
this gig.
or
yeah.
Questlove, you know, tunes the snare drum and all this, and just sits down and it's like, you know, perfect, or you know,
I love
those
these stories
moments.
because it goes right along with these players from LA that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That there's just so much skill involved in it, and I really think that there's a general thinking that the studio tools and software and trickery mean that you don't have to be a great player. You don't have to be a great player to make a record, but when you do sit next to, when you do hear somebody play their ass off on a record, it's really a different experience.
Oh, yeah.
It really, really, really. I mean,
The air moves completely differently out of the speakers because they know how to push it, you know?
Eric Campbell, really
Yeah, of course,
great guitar.
Roscoe.
Roscoe, you know, I was producing a track, which I sometimes do, just for fun because I, you know, got to get out of the mastering room once in a while. And I was just like, what's up with this guy? I brought it out to Cowboy Technical there in Williamsburg, and it's like, what's up with this part? It's just yeah, but he's playing all the notes. And he goes, yeah, it's in his hands.
Yeah.
And he didn't even see the guy play it, but he could just tell that this was, and so he just, you got 10 minutes? And I said, yeah. We put a Royer on the guitar amp, and he plugged in and tuned like in 30 seconds, and he was playing a part that killed the other part. But on the surface, it was the same notes, even in the same time.
Yeah.
It was, but it was light years different in feel and in vibe.
Yep.
Yeah.
We see it all the time. It's just like, it's exactly what John said, is the sessions where the less we do, the better it sounds as, engineers. You can get crazy as a producer, but if you're engineering.
Yeah, that's in certain genres as well.
Yeah.
Like obviously there's times to, destroy sounds or
Yeah.
get really creative
sure.
with distortion or compression or weird mic choices or placement. It sounds like we're kind of downplaying that side of it, but you kind of have to be able to do both. That's the other thing too. There's a lot of people who are recording stuff and trying to just make cool records, but they can't capture a good sound. And it's funny, like we've observed this, and I'm sure you've noticed similar things. I'm sure there's parallels in mastering that things that used to be really hard, you keep doing the same thing, and it keeps getting easier and sounding better.
With
like
the
it used to
same
be,
signal chain.
It used to be really hard to get a really good grand piano sound. And I'm probably not putting the mics in that different of a play. It's something about it's really weird. I'm sure it's like, a dB of gain on your console probably sounds, you can probably do more with that now than you could 20 years ago. With that 1 dB. You could turn the knob, but...
Great example, or a great point to make for the students is that it's in the instrument, or else you got to do a lot of extra work to make something happen, and the results generally never equal what it is when it's in the instrument. But then the use of the technology is a whole other thing. We've got like yourself, hundreds of options, and when I hear something, I don't try 100 options. I mean, even if somebody was going to pay me to do that, I wouldn't try 100 different ways of EQing something. It's an instinctual, it's almost an instinctual reaction. And sometimes, people are actually doing this while I'm having a conversation, and then I hit the input button where bypass all my effects, and they go, "What's that?" I was like, "Well, that's your mix." I then, no, don't say it, but let me hear that other thing that you were just playing. Play the other thing, that's the EQ. But it's experience, but it's the hardest thing. I have a lot of young engineers and people that have brought up through the mastering around me. And the hardest thing to teach is when to stop, when to stop turning the knobs. You can.
Yep.
That applies to everything. And when to stop doing punches on the vocal, when to stop stacking background vocals. Those are the things that you only learn over time. Like that. That
was really fascinating. I'm belaboring this point about these session cats, but 1-2 takes, and they had the parts figured out, and they were doing arrangements. They were just playing off of chords. Yep. They didn't. They would just, somebody came in with a song idea. There's plenty of cats that can do this. It's just they're not compensated for making records these days. And I don't want to make it sound like it could never happen. It just, maybe you get, as an audience, maybe you get an opportunity to bring somebody's talent out, not just show them what you can do with a plugin, with a tool.
Yeah, I think that's also what pop music is now. It's sort of regardless of anyone's opinion on it, back then, pop music was played by live bands. Now it's not, and so there are those players around, but not as many people want to hear it, in the general public, or know that they want to hear it. Not to get on the sort of soapbox of like,
no,
well,
but
people actually heard
it's
a
true.
band.
We're kind of missing out. I mean, just Will Lee just sent out a blast. He's spending a couple months or a month or so in Japan. It's the only place that he can with Steve Gadd and et al. Of these these cats. Japan will have them play, but the U.S. won't. I mean, it's I really think we're missing out on some of the that skill. In this fake sense that we don't need a real acoustic room, that we don't need real players, that we can build something. Now, I'm not going to, join. I try not to join the soapbox. I totally get it. Well, if you could make music in your bedroom,
Well, yeah,
absolutely.
we love electronic. You know, I love
Sure.
dance music, so you know,
It's not a big white paintbrush that we're
Yeah.
talking about, but it's if we forget, you know, that we're trying to help musicians play, you know, when we're making records, then
Yeah.
I think we're not making great
Yeah.
music.
I mean, I think just what you mentioned, just like the thing of putting people in like this, hearing people play in a room. I mean, that's one of the biggest revelations for us too when we moved to this new studio is finally putting people in a room that's designed for music
sounds good.
and sounds great. Yeah, and then just hearing people play, and then all of a sudden, the reason why we're actually have the studio and it's doing well is because I think we created a place that people want to play, and it sounds good, and then people want to play. You know, because they do actually want to play music together live.
Yeah.
And people walk in, they're like, oh, I was thinking of,
We don't think about fun anywhere
Yeah.
near enough.
yeah, and it's like, oh, I had somebody come in the other day and they're like, oh, I was thinking of doing my record, but now I see that I could actually have everybody set up with isolation, and we can all see each other, and we can play, so why don't I just do my record live? And I was like, yeah. That's,
You know, and even people recording at home, or recording in small environments, I find them not enjoying the process. You know, find you know, fighting with the gear, fighting with the microphone, fighting with not being able to get the sound that they want. I mentioned collaboration, you know, at the top, and it's really, really important. Everything that you guys said about producing is collaboration, is you know, not, you know, heavy-handed producing. And I think maybe the 70s and 80s kind of, you know, set us back a peg with this, because there's this idea that the producer would take over. The producer got the lion's share of the money, you know, and the guy and oftentimes cheated bands and artists out of their, not this crowd, I know, this is after all of that. But my point is that there is really, really, really an important role there that can't, I mean, the guitarist might be able to produce somebody else's record, but I don't think he can produce his own record.
this has happened the other day, and we had a conversation about it. A record that I tracked basics on, and then John did overdubs yesterday, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And the guitar player came in to do some. Remember the guy playing slide?
Oh yeah.
And we just had this exact conversation where we were talking about it, and our experience was the same with this guy. It was like he had great ears. You know, we're both like, yeah, he's obviously a good producer. But when he came in, he wanted to be produced. He was like a mature enough player to know that he was like, what should I play? Tell me what to play, and I'll play it. And when I was working with him, I was like, dude, why don't you just do it like this? He's like, oh, totally, I got it. And he'd play it in one take. And then, you know, the other day he was talking to John too. He's like, tell me what to play, you know, and it was great. And then when we were on the session earlier, he was helping the artists that he was playing for, kind of producing them. And it's that exact point.
This is great for them to really see this difference in this role, because I think most people really think of themselves, I've noticed a lot of young engineers think of themselves as the producer, and there's this, I don't really think they have a big enough view of what's going on to sort of be at that point. In any case,
I think the important part too about that with the collaboration is it kind of has to be egoless from everyone involved. The reason it worked with this guitar player is because he wasn't coming at it with an agenda. He wasn't trying to take over the session, or he wasn't trying to push some lick that he'd been working on the thing. It was like, you know, genuinely putting effort into making a better, you know, trying to make a better record.
Yeah, he just wanted to play the right thing, and he wanted help to get there.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great.
It was
I mean,
awesome.
that trust relationship that the guys have with the artists.
Yeah,
That's
sometimes you don't have that, you know, sometimes you have to,
well.
it's life.
Yeah, you pick the battles, and sometimes you can win them, and sometimes you
Yeah,
just have to go with the flow.
Sometimes you give up and just engineer. And just try and do as good a job at that.
Got another question there?
Could I sneak one in, and then I've got another question right here
Sure.
lined up. In a town full of so many guys that would love to be in the position where the talent's coming to them, asking to be recorded on a pretty maxed out basis, what would you tell your engineering / musician self when you were younger, what you know now? What is one thing you might tell your younger self when you were starting out that would allow you to better be your own man, better make what you're doing your actual career, and not just sliding it by?
Well, I think one thing that Aaron and I both share, and you know, I don't know enough about your background on that, but we've had fairly diversified approaches to paying rent and eating food in New York. You know, so, you know, we've both done live sound gigs. We've both done a lot of freelance pickup session work just as players, or getting called for, you know, some singer-songwriter gig at Rockwood, or, you know, sort of being on the scene to a certain extent as players, doing sound, you know, sometimes recording people for free if it's someone you really want to work with when you're just starting out. You know, that may sound counterproductive from a studio owner encouraging people to work for free, but it's like, you know, we've all done it. So, you know, it's like, but you have to be open to not just thinking you can do one thing and make it. Like, I'm just going to record rock records. Like, because you're not, probably. Like, maybe you will.
I think
you
the
know.
world kind of wants you to be pigeonholed, but I think it's a good point to not. I learned from Bob Ludwig, whose genre span is literally as wide as you can imagine.
Yep.
From the most minimalist avant-garde through the heaviest of metal. You know, rap wasn't really on the scene, you know, during his formative years, but he would have done it if it has.
Yeah.
It was that's what seemed normal to me. So that's actually what I emulated, and I was also being kind of easily bored. I find it, you know, enjoyable to move around and kind of force myself. Well, I don't even have to force myself. By automatically, I don't have cookie cutters. I'd have to have, you know, 300 of them. I wouldn't know which cookie cutter to grab because there's so many derivatives. But what I would I wouldn't necessarily do something differently, but I would want to share with the group that the apprenticeship and mentorship that I did really replaced the real world experience that these guys had, but kind of brought it into a similar kind of understanding and appreciation for the, you know, the wide landscape of opinions and such. So it's and that's why I enjoyed the opportunity to bring you guys in to talk about it, because it's different, and it might also really more closely relate to where a current engineering student is going to find their way of working their way through.
Yeah. I mean, I think just kind of following on from what both you said is, I think the thing that I would tell myself to directly answer the question is I would have listened to way more different types of music a lot more. I think that's probably the most important thing you can do as an engineer is listen to every single thing you can ever get your hands on all the time. And that's it. Because the more stuff you have in here, and as a musician as well, I wish I hadn't spent so many years just playing jazz, because I missed out on so much other cool music, you know? And there's just so much, you know, but when you're doing something that you really want to get good at, and you're really focusing on it, you know, a lot of stuff has to get pushed aside because you have to work on it. But, you know, I wish I'd listened to, you know, every single other thing that I haven't listened to.
So similar. I mean, there were entire decades of music that I discovered after the fact and came back to, because I was focused on the things that I was not so much working on, but enjoying. You know, this is through my young years in college and early work environment. Could I have a microphone down front? Good question. Right here.
Hi, I'm a big fan of Lettuce, and
I was gonna play a track. Just queued up to.
I've listened to pretty much all their records, including some of their live ones, and this one is my absolute.
Turn it. I mean, it was queued up to play. I mean, I gotta play louder. This has got to be played loud.
Subs.
Subs. That sounds good. That's these guys. Yeah, it's great. I mean,
And I've always been a big fan of funk, and I was just wondering how you got that kick and snare sound.
I put Adam Deitch on our Ludwig kit.
Yep.
Mics and.
Oh, I mean, I put Adam Deitch. I mean, I could have used absolutely anything. I mean, you know, there was a bunch of. I'm trying to remember what the setup was. It wasn't.
You were using just outside kick, right? Was it two kicks?
No.
I remember a 635 in the corner. That's what I remember, and a 74.
pardon me for sounding biased, but the generation is almost entirely overconsumed with the bits and pieces. And I really want to kind of emphasize the point with, they did something that sounded great. And then they knew it, they heard what they were going for, the musician was there. I don't mean to belittle the question, but there is absolutely no formula. Because you can take that formula and move it to another environment and get a really crappy result.
Yeah.
So be really cognizant of training, you're learning, listening, being able to react with your ears.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple particularly fun things going on that, which Aaron just reminded me of. I had a Electro Voice 635A, which is a really cheap Omni dynamic mic that I bought for $25 at a yard sale in Western Pennsylvania or something, in the corner of our drum room, and that was distorted through something, and then through a Gates Solid Statesman limiter, a Gates Solid Statesman, which is a really weird cheap broadcast limiter, and a Yuri, whatever that EQ
546.
is. Yeah, 546 EQ, and that mic sounded horrible but kind of amazing. You know, that was like a really dark and really smushy, and you know, it's not the main sound, but that's a big part of it. An RCA 74 that I bought also at a antique show a couple of years ago, like over the back shoulder, with a Dayking FET 2 compressor. I don't remember the preamp. The overhead I think was a mono CMV 563. Bayer M201 on the snare. I don't think I had a snare bottom. No, I did. Maybe 57, E602, and might have been Brad's 47 in front of the kit. I had Brad's 47 in front of the kit.
Yeah.
A friend of ours built a 47 from like new old stock parts, and maybe some room mics.
Yeah, there's something.
Definitely room mics. Maybe.
Yeah.
But not stereo. Maybe
Yeah.
just like a single tube mic in front.
Yeah, John's pretty mono. But I think what
No,
John
it's
said
track to tape,
initially
too.
was probably the most important thing you can take away from
Yeah,
it. Like
yeah.
Adam Deitch on a drum kit, or any great player on an instrument, like what Scott said before, doesn't matter what you use, just don't mess it up.
Yeah, it's kind of the job is to not mess it up and add
Yeah.
a couple interesting things. It's like, you know, I don't know about you, but Aaron and I are both like really into cooking as well. You know, it's kind of one of our totally, you know, it's like if you get a really good piece of meat, you know, people are gonna be like, how do you make that steak taste so good? It's like, well, like put a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper and I put it over some fire. You know, it's only, you know, maybe you make a good dish that goes on the side that takes a little bit more chops, but the chops is not messing it up.
Yeah.
You know?
And then like you said too, just doing the fun thing that when the musician comes into the room, that you push up the distorted room mic, that they're like, yeah, and then they get psyched about recording because they heard something really awesome they hadn't heard before.
Exactly.
But also doing all the solid stuff that's not going to mess it up.
Yeah. Is that
Hey, the microphone back?
How's it going?
Great.
I guess I'm going to direct this question to Mr. Davis. I'm a huge fan of the Nerve and the stuff you guys
Cool.
produce. The soundscapes you come up with is absolutely incredible. I was curious, how'd you get into electronic music, and did you go into it with knowledge of synthesis and sound design, or was it a lot of experimentation?
a little bit of both. I got introduced to electronic music by a bass teacher I had in high school. I remember he made me like a mixtape that had like some Square Pusher stuff and some Aphex Twin and like some stuff from the first Bjork record. And that was probably in like 95 or something like that. And then I met a friend of ours that Aaron was mentioning before, this guy John Blackford, who's a really good electronic music producer and had a studio in the city where we would go and hang out, and he had a ton of synthesizers. And this was all long before I joined Nerve. But I had never, in regards to actually like the playing and the doing the music, before I joined the band, I had never really put the two together. It was like I'd play bass, and then I would make tracks. You know, I'd go play a jazz piano trio gig for 3 hours, and then the next day I'd be sitting in front of my computer making beats or whatever, and it never really occurred to me to put the two together. Or not didn't occur to me, but I didn't see a need to until, you know, someone was like, oh, JoJo's looking for a new bass player. You know, you should call him. I was like, okay. And then kind of figured out how to translate what I knew about modular synthesizers and stuff, and figure out a way to do that with my pedals, and then with the drums too. We've, you know, try and mess up the sounds.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Hey, I just wanted to ask you guys, how do you like escape using like, you know, the conventional like mic placement on like a guitar amp and come up with something creative that sounds good? Like, how do you like to approach that? Do you take, I know you were talking about like using like a distorted, you know, room sound on like a drum kit to like give it some more character, and how do you like to typically like throw like new cards out on the table when you're
You
recording?
should feel that on the guitar, the cool guitar sounds front.
Well, I mean, my first answer to that is, why do you want to? Like, what's wrong with a mic in front of a guitar amp? You know, most of the time it's really great if you got a great guitar player with great pedals. And like, I don't know, I feel like people are super obsessed about trying to not do what, you know, which is great, but like trying to do it different, or throwing away like 57 in front of a guitar amp sounds bad, or you read all the stuff on the internet and people are like, this is terrible. But really, like, you put a 57 in front of a guitar amp through a Neve, it's going to sound awesome if the guitar player is good and they got a great sound. It's really simple to record a guitar amp.
Yeah.
People overthink this stuff so much, and we see it again with like people coming through, or it's just like, do it simple and it's going to sound good.
Yeah, and
But then you can mess it up.
Yeah.
You know, maybe put a room mic up or put a weird mic up. But I mean, something like a guitar amp, you're not really going to do anything to it because it's a weird instrument anyway. It's like band limit. You know, it's about this big compared to the Spectrum. You know, so you know, you don't have to get crazy with it. But one of the things we always do. Sorry, I'm going to finish one idea. Is we always do something different as much as possible. I mean, that's one of the things that I am always inspired by John. I walk in on one of his sessions and he's doing something, I'm like, oh damn, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that next time. And you know, vice versa. And I think that's one, or like just trying to think of something you haven't done before and doing it. But again, just like, I think simplicity is one of the most important things you can do for yourself. You can always mess it up later, or just have something solid and mess it up. But again, it's so genre specific and what you're trying to, you know, if you can hear it, find out how to do it. But I don't put mics up to figure out a sound, you know. I try to find the sound that you're looking for and find that.
I think that's like the most important thing is like, if you're hearing a sound, to go for it. You know, it's there's nothing that's like more annoying as a mix engineer than when you get a Pro Tools session that someone recorded that could be totally normal, and there's like a million extra tracks of things that are inappropriate, weird choices. I mean, I love weird sounding stuff, so I kind of have to preface it with like that we both love weird sounds, but it has to really be the right music. I mean, if something calls for, you know, putting a mic on the floor 20 feet away from the guitar amp because that's really the sound that overdub needs, then that's totally awesome, and you should only be restricted by your, you know, your own creativity, your own idea of how weird it needs to be. But you also, it requires I guess it's kind of like humility as an engineer to know when it should just be the 57. Like, as much as you want to do something cool, sometimes it really should just be like the 414 or the M160, or because that's, you know, or it should be a 635 in a PVC tube that's 15 feet long facing the other way. You know, like, but it really needs to be about the music.
Try to hear it first is I guess the answer.
Yeah.
Do you guys now still tear apart recordings? Listen to something someone else has done and then try to figure out, kind of recreate, not deliberately to recreate something, but go like, that's interesting. You must have done something like this. I mean, just probably started doing that.
Definitely. I mean, I think so. Yeah.
I mean, recently I had a really an interesting realization, or possibly a realization, where I figured out how something that I liked was probably done, sort of by accident. And it was, I don't know if there's a lot of Radiohead fans in the house, but on Kid A, on the push-pull revolving doors track or whatever, periodically there's these, Nigel Godrich will capture these sends into like an infinite reverb on the vocals, and it's a really weird vocal sound. It's Tom York talking into auto-tune, the hardware one set to 100%, you know, to grab the notes. And that part I had read about, but I'd never been able to figure out how they got these, where it would grab a syllable and turn into almost like a granular synthesis kind of wall of the thing. And we got a really good deal used on a Lexicon 200. And when you're on the chamber patches and you turn the time all the way up, it's infinite hold on whatever's going in. And when you turn it off, it's on, and then there's a reverb stop button. So all you do is you stop the reverb and then you go bam on the last syllable, and holds this. I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Who's got the next? Somebody has to have a microphone. I lost track. I think you were one of the first hands. There's somebody in the middle. It's great. Love a lot of questions. Fire. Go ahead, and then bring the microphone down here. Another microphone down front. We're playing traffic cop.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you guys exercise any sort of little tricks to better the workflow when you're working with musicians, when you're trying to, or when they're trying to lay something down. Is there something that you do to maybe an exercise that you use to have them loosen up, or
Just make them feel really comfortable from the minute they walk in the studio.
Yeah.
Goes
back to just being able to read people and make them feel good.
Yeah, be cool. Just be really cool with people, and they'll be really happy, and then they'll do really good work. Say welcome when people walk in the door. That's what I always do.
Please and thank you stuff.
Yeah.
It can be so easy.
Yeah, so simple.
I'm gonna play 30 seconds more of this. It goes on and gets greater every listen. The point that I wanted to make, and it was about an earlier question, but not just about lettuce, but master engineer is probably supposed to sit kind of still and kind of listen real carefully. I couldn't stop moving. I was looking at this record, and I'm keep being kind of a little restrained up here right now. The music and the production and everything, and I'm not just doing this for these guys' sake. It's just it captured a lot of.
That's a good example of artists who really, those guys all know how to produce, and those guys, they're characters if you know them. They're really funny guys, but they all know how to produce and they all know how to stay out of each other's way. And that that song was completely Neil Evans's tune. I mean, and he knew exactly how he wanted the mix to sound too. It was hard pan the drums, don't use any snare top mic, put the bass and the guitar on the opposite side of the drums. I want spring reverb on the snare. And we probably took 2 hours finding the right spring sound because he really knew what he wanted. It ended up being my Space Echo, not for the reverb, but just for a tape slap into a Gibson GA15 guitar amp in the live room.
Okay.
Mic'd up with a pair of room mics.
Oh, okay.
And it's a cool amp because it can do 100% wet. The reverb feeds off the input, so you can turn all the channels off and turn up the reverb and get, it's a more acoustic, strangely acoustic spring sound. But that's one of those things where they didn't need a producer. That was just stay out of the way.
No.
Make sure nothing's clipping too much on the tape machine.
I love that this connects the theme of instead of turning knobs to find a cool sound, start with a vision. Start with an imagine what this thing could sound like. It's absolutely true of producers, and it's been said of the mastering profession, is literally the skill is imagining what it could sound like, and then knowing how to operate the system, operate the tools, operate the performers to achieve that. It's backwards. I mean, you got to learn how to turn the knobs and turn all the tools. So during this phase of your career and development, that's what you're going to be focused on. It's how to operate the tools. But you got to anyway. I may be overemphasizing the point, but it's I'm not sure I can.
Yeah.
Right here in front.
Well, I guess sort of going with the finding a general vision for a song and for a band, I was just wondering that as producers, how often do you find yourselves revisiting the original composition? How often do you have to bust out your songwriting skills, or do you? And do artists turn to you often for that?
Like reworking the songs with the artists?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the lyrics and the melodies and things
Yeah,
like that.
I mean, again, depending on your role and what you're going in as, yeah, that's kind of one of the funnest things to do as a producer is helping the artist develop the song and helping them discover, finding what the core of the song is. Like, because a lot of time people will write stuff and they don't know what the coolest thing is that they've done. They just do a bunch of cool stuff, but maybe one of the things is really the coolest thing. You have to help them find that and then bring that front, whether it's, or a band is all about the vocalist, so you got to take everything else out and really just make the vocalist come forward, or if it's about the groove, like, the lettuce thing, and just really making sure that the groove is the most pumping thing. But to get right on that question, yeah, it's definitely, we do both rework songs, harmony, melodies, lyrics if we have to. I mean, we both kind of try to stay away from the lyrics if we can, but yeah, if it needs to not go to that 5 chord, or if it needs 2 more bars or 10 less bars, when you're really producing, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
It's hard to produce somebody that doesn't want to be produced, obviously.
They have to have, again, like, they have to take the ego and just be like, I'm totally open to anything. And the best experiences I've had with bands have been people who have just been open to it and have been like, oh yeah, that is better, I love it. And, or like, I like it, but I'm not sure. I'm like, okay, let me try a little harder.
Yeah.
Not my first idea, maybe my second or my third idea. Help them get to the place where they're happy, I'm happy, and the music hopefully gets better.
Yeah.
Does that become like an integral part of the process of working with an artist, of like going back always to the original composition and seeing what you can change instead of just,
Only if they
twisting the
need
knobs?
it. Only if they need it. Again, like some people already come in with the song is great. I'm not going to touch it, and some people, there's such a great core idea, you find out what it is, and you bring it to the fore again.
Obviously, when you're producing, you're involved with them at pre-production phases, right?
Sometimes it depends on,
Hopefully.
if it's set up in a way that you can go to rehearsal and be like, oh, cool, or you're getting demos at least, and you can be like, I love that song, let's
But
really do
literally
that
people are
song.
walking in the door and unguided, and so you just
A lot of times it's that, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know what it's going to be until they walk in the door. Those are usually not the ones where you're producing, but
you end up
Helping as much as possible.
Yeah.
sometimes it's little, like knowing, like, oh, it'd be great if you just like harmonize that line up a third. It doesn't have to be a big thing, or
Yeah, and a big part of that is also just helping with arrangements, which you can do a lot more than rewriting the songs a lot of times. Sometimes the song, you're not going to change the song, it's just not an option. Due to time, or
Yeah.
due to just inflexibility on that, but maybe you can say to the guitar player, hey, why don't you just maybe try this? And it doesn't have to be like, you should do that. It's more like, have you ever thought about doing that? Or maybe we could try it like that, or, just gentle guidance is a really good way to go.
This is a pet peeve of mine when I hear stories. I don't have as much studio time as you guys do, but I hear a lot of the post-mortem of the what's happened after
You hear more of it than
that's all
us.
happened.
Yeah.
But it really aggravates me when I hear the stories of the engineer who found it was more concerned about convincing the artist or that they were wrong, or they weren't hearing it, or it wasn't for real, or it'll be fine in the mix, the classic fix it, the next fix it, the
Fix it in the
mastering.
master.
But I'm not even really, it's even worse than that. It's like putting up a wall that's saying, you're not as intelligent about technology as I am, so, you just go out and play your part. You've destroyed any chance of ever having a trust relationship with them. And you're going to be fighting them all the whole way. And exactly what happens when those people are telling me these stories. They're telling me, spreading the word so that that person never works with, they have never worked with that person again. Yeah. And they're likely to tell way more people that you're not cool to work with than any one person's going to tell people that you are cool to work with. So my point is, it takes a lot less time to try something for the sake of the artist and their own psyche and the environment and the vibe and the mood of the session than it takes to argue about whether or not it's going to work or not.
Yeah, I think probably the most important word you can think of if you want to be a producer is empathy. You really have to put yourself in the artist's shoes and try to understand how they're feeling when they're working with you. And and it's like what, as John was saying before too, is like, you get to, as you get more experience, you get to better at judging, how many more takes a singer is going to need to get better, or is like at 2 takes like what the singer needs? Are they going to keep on getting better? Are they feeling frustrated? Are they feeling cool? Are they into working hard? Are they like the sort of person that doesn't want to do 2 or 3 takes and you're just going to make it work? You know, you got to make people feel good, and so empathy is a great, you know, just thinking about how they feel and trying to make them feel good.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing this. I'm having a great time listening to you guys, but surprisingly, his microphone smells really good. Anyway, I have a question for you. It's not really a question. I want you to tell me another story, and it's the answer to this question is both not only psychological in nature but also financial, and it is. I want you to tell me about some experiences, good and bad, on attempting to sell to the client, because not all musicians know what mastering is. How do you get them to agree to outsource the mastering to a specialist?
I mean, I can kind of go, I can say fairly certainly that everyone sitting on here is pretty vehemently opposed to the notion of anyone who mixes anything mastering it. I mean, it's a really stupid notion. I remember you were telling me that you did that thing you judged some thing at SAE or wherever, at some audio school, and you couldn't believe that all the things you were judging had the same person listed as mixing and mastering. I just try and really convey to artists I'm working with how crucial it is that, like, I can't master it, and neither can any other mix engineer who says they can.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's hard to convey. Quite frankly, if the results don't speak for themselves, then it's probably the wrong mastering engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And this sounds really egotistical coming out of my mouth to say that, but frankly, when there is a situation where someone sends me a pre-mastered thing that the mix engineer did, if mine, which is invariably going to cost more than the mix, if I can't blow it away, then I'm either not working hard enough, or the guys put a lot of effort into doing a decent mastering job with it. I almost can't answer it directly, because it's a question as a business owner I'm trying to answer all the time. How do I convey to people the value of mastering when it's now been sort of commoditized into and kind of extracted from its whole purpose? The mastering isn't the process. It's a perspective. It's not the process of putting stuff in and making it louder and brighter and balancing the levels. It's not the textbook thing. I don't think about those concepts when I'm mastering ever anymore. Maybe I did when I was very, very new to it, but I'm not thinking about how bright this record should be. I'm trying to make it sound good. But good is the point that I'm trying to make. That's the perspective. So it's. I hopefully have added some insight, but I'm not sure I can answer the question directly.
Well, this is really more for you guys. Have you ever had a client fight you about it? I've been like,
Yeah.
no, we're not spending the money, you do it.
Yeah. Well,
never that you do it.
No,
It
'cause
usually
we'd just be no.
It usually just ends up going to someone who does a really terrible job, like over the internet.
Yeah. I mean,
And then they get a record that doesn't do well, and they wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody asks me, like, should I do mastering or I don't want to do mastering, I say, I was like, number one, we don't do it.
Yeah.
And if you want to hear something that's mastered really well, here's the before and here's the after of something that I've already worked on. And people go, oh, wow, that sounds really good because it was mastered by a really good mastering engineer. They can hear the difference. And but a lot of people don't understand what mastering is. And that's the problem. If you explain to them what it is, and you can give them an example of something that's been mastered really well as, the mix and then the great mastering, they'll hear the difference. Mm-hmm. I mean, and then I tell them too, I'm like, I don't want my work going to a terrible mastering engineer because I've had too many records destroyed. And even at this time, sometimes I've had things that it's not my choice who it goes to for mastering, or because of budget it goes to somebody who, isn't my first choice, and it makes me really upset when I get these records back. I'm like, I put all this work into it, doesn't sound good,
It's a sum of the parts, but it also needs to be, some of my favorite regular clients, including these guys, are people that mix with mastering in mind. Mm-hmm. They've attended the mastering sessions. They've seen what work. They've seen what over recording, coming in with stuff too compressed, what that does to the mastering process. What color smoke comes out of my ears. I'm joking, of course, but the point is they've attended the mastering session. They've learned what about the process, and so they can use it. They can use the process to their benefit. One of my clients tells me that he can just simply mix faster, knowing that I'm going to work on it afterwards. He can just work creatively and not worry about so many of the little tiny finite details. It's a long discussion.
Yeah, I think just touching on one of the things that Scott mentioned earlier too is the issue of mentorship. And as a mix engineer and as a independent studio owner, we don't get to work with a lot of older engineers, mixers, and we don't get to watch other people do the work that we want to do a lot of the time. But one of the benefits working with a great mastering engineer, and we developed a relationship with Alan Tucker a long time ago from Foothill Digital, and when we were just really first starting out, and then with our relationship with Scott too, is working with the same mastering engineer who has years of experience and perspective. That's like a mentorship, because they're going to give you feedback, and you can if you ask them for feedback, they're going to help you out. So it's one of the things as an engineer and as a producer too, is like, that's kind of something that people maybe overlook, is if you can find a mastering engineer who's miles ahead of you, number one, they're going to make your music sound better and your mixes sound better, but they're also going to give you the feedback that's going to help you get better.
Yeah, I think tying into that too is like, which ties into how do you evolve and how do you get good and how do you develop clients in this market, and a lot of it too is like sort of having close friends and people who are also doing it, and you push each other. I don't know what the climate is like here in the school here. At the jazz school, it was definitely like that. When you're around a bunch of people trying to be the best and at what they can do or whatever. And with mixes, it's like play your mixes for your friends who are engineers and get feedback and be like, oh, how's this cool? And then someone's like, oh wow, you really got like the snare right on this one. Especially older engineers, if you're friends with. We've got some older engineer friends where it's like, bouncing ideas off people and sort of challenging each other in a not in an aggressive way, but it's like, I'll hear Aaron do something with a delay or a reverb, like he was saying, coming in and hearing some sound, being like, oh shit, I got it like that. There it is, like, oh, why didn't I do that? Like, that's great, I'm going to do that next time. And we've definitely upped our game substantially there may not be as much of the mentorship thing, but there is feedback from mastering engineers, feedback from your peers, and asking people to be kind of ruthless with their critiques too. Like, you should be able to be like, like, what's wrong with this mix? And
Who's got?
Hi.
Hi there.
I was thinking about the evolution of recording technology and how that has brought about changes in the recording process and the production process. For example, in older Beatles songs, they used to rehearse their voices and mix themselves acoustically before the recording because of the technology that they were dealing with. And now the recording technology allows a lot more flexibility in the recording process. And I was wondering if, in your opinion, that makes the process a lot more expedited and less musical in rehearsal, or whether it allows musicians to be less musical or not, or if it doesn't really matter because it depends on the style of music. I don't know if you understand my question, but what is your opinion on that process and the changes?
Well, I'll answer the question in the middle. We can't change the fact of technology. You can't change where it's taking the music, but we can certainly experiment by working outside of the normal technology and seeing how it inspires the musicians and the music and creates a fun factor. I'm a huge fan of live to two-track stuff that's just immediacy type of recording. I think it's an outgrowth now of having heard so much of processed music that's allegedly perfect, that isn't as inspiring as seeing a very simple live performance or so. That's my take on it. We've never had to use the technology. There's actually a very interesting 78 project. This Do you know this guy? I'm bad with names. We're taking an old Presto, I believe, or an old 78 recorder, and he's taking it to folk musicians and recording on the old format. You don't have to use the technology. And that's a little extreme, but it's on purpose. But it's if the music needs the technology to sound good, maybe there's a problem. I mean, again, we're excluding styles of music that require layering and require studio techniques and overdubbing and things. But
yeah, I think like when you reference a band like the Beatles, you kind of have to, all of a sudden you have to take, Flying Lotus out of the equation, like because you're not talking about the same thing anymore. So the Beatles would have probably still been able to make Revolver on an iPad with GarageBand. It wouldn't have sounded as good because it's a much lower quality recording format than a Studer 4-track. I mean, that's the other thing too. You're talking about some of the most high fidelity equipment that's ever been made. So what we have now is much lower fidelity than, I remember when they did the remaster of Kind of Blue.
yeah.
And they did it on some custom tape, and they found signal going up to like 56K coming off the tape heads.
Yeah.
And there's not a digital format except maybe DSD that won't brick wall. So I mean, I think that's a misconception that older technology is inferior. It's actually often superior, it's just not as flexible, and so you can't do as many things, but it's actually, yeah, from an objectively it's better, but subjectively you have to, the reason it doesn't work with a band that's not as good as the Beatles is just because it's not as good a band as the Beatles. Like we hear horn sections that could play into one mic,
Yeah.
The Lettuce stuff I multi-track, but you could have put up one mic and captured them exactly the same way, and it would have been, those horns. Those guys are an unbelievable section.
You could have convinced me that they were playing to a track. I heard them live.
Yeah.
The parts were dead.
No,
on.
So there still is that quality of musicianship. It's just because of the technology, for better or for worse, you can make good professional sounding recordings of less skilled or practiced bands. Back then there was no option but sounding that good. If you didn't sound that good, you didn't get signed. Now you can get signed and not sound good. And we work harder.
Yes, hi. I think all of us in this room can understand that actually starting a studio is not a cheap process at all with, gear, HVAC, soundproofing, the space itself. I was curious as to how you guys actually financed the bunker, like how you guys started, and if there's any tips that you can give us financially if we wanted to start our own studios.
Do it in small increments.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we did. We just, that's the why we started a studio, because we had gear. We didn't start a studio to buy gear and then start a studio. We had we were both
828. We both had the first generation Motu 828, and I had a Rode NT1. Maybe we both did.
Yeah, we had your CAD.
I had a CAD E100
I had an
and
NT1.
an NT1.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. Basically we started really small and we bought the next thing that was really important to us.
Yeah.
And after that we bought the next thing that was really important to us until we had enough stuff that it was stupid to have it in a rehearsal space with a band playing next door and for you to have roommates walking through your apartment.
Like, you have to stay in your bedroom for another hour. I'm doing vocal takes.
Yeah. And then that's when we built a studio, and it was a small studio that we built for very little money and built it ourselves without HVAC. And, we did real small steps, and that's how we...
Yeah, over the last 10 years, pretty much. I think that's about when we moved into that space, was 2002. So it's been about 10 years since we even were doing it in our bedrooms with an 828 and a laptop or whatever. So,
Can sort of second that, even though I came from a really different sort of background in building big studios. I managed, and I think it's still, potential, might still be a potential path. I accumulated gear, as I moved from studio, from home base to home base. So I, like any gear junkie would, basically, I put 3/4 of what I made back into the gear.
Well, that's
and I tried really hard not to sell stuff. And I figured out, I mean, the only time I was unhappy was when I realized, later that I wish I hadn't sold something. So I would accumulate gear, but then each time I'd move to another facility or another environment, there's another opportunity to put that gear into place or to build a second room. My second room came off of the spares that I'd accumulated from the other two places, and then took over another facility. So it kind of works in that environment as well. But you've got to you have to have a pretty good idea of what you want. You can't sort of just indiscriminately buy pieces of gear. And I had a lot of grounding. I had almost 15 years of in a professional mastering studio.
Right.
Before, so I had a pretty
Before
good idea.
going on your own, yeah. Yeah, it's just, I think, being financially conservative as much as
Do
possible.
we have a question up there? Oh, up in the cheap seats.
I just wanted to ask what it is you think that sets your studio apart from all the other studios that are popping up in Brooklyn these days. Do you think it has to do with your ability to use and operate analog gear? Is that what draws a lot of clients?
I think the main thing that
These two guys.
well, there's two elements of it really, because we've built a clientele who trust us and like us, and our reputation precedes us just from working for the years and working really hard at this. But what sets our studio apart from the rest of Brooklyn is it's a great sounding room. And that's not like arrogant, but it's like our designer designed an incredible sounding room. We talked a lot about what we wanted. We had a really clear concept of what we wanted. And we wanted a place where people would play live music together, have that option, and then, not have that option as well, or not take the option, but we wanted really great sounding rooms where people could play live together and see each other. There's not many studios like that anymore. It's sad because the city used to be full of them, and it doesn't exist anymore. And that's why people are coming to us, because there's a space to do that again in Brooklyn, which probably doesn't really exist.
Right down in front. Mike's coming.
How's it going? So I just wanted to ask you about the location of your studio and considerations that you guys may have about like noise complaints, business zoning laws. I mean, I know parts of Brooklyn, Williamsburg can be sort of quiet and a little bit off the beaten path. But do you guys have to do some like really extreme soundproofing to like get around the issue, or?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, before we did this, this kind of ties into the question about the finances and sort of just making something like that happen. We knew we were going to have to move because we had outgrown our old space. We were looking for spaces, and that was always a big concern, is like, we need to be able to operate 24 hours a day. Our old facility was underneath apartments, the old studio. So we, 10 p.m. was pushing it for, not that we like to work much past that anyway, but it's like, it was really like keep the neighbors happy, not get kicked out, that kind of thing. So going into the design, that was one of the things, like Aaron said, talking to Rod, the architect, being like, look, we need to do this right. We need isolation, not just from us, between the control room and the live room and the drum room and the string room. Those all need whatever amount of isolation they need, but we also need to be isolated from the outside world. And so there's a lot more pounds and tonnage of sheetrock than we probably would have liked to have hung,
It's really hard.
Yeah, and we also built the place ourselves with just a couple friends and like one carpenter. So we hired one guy. We had to have a safety supervisor from the contractor whose numbers we were working under, and other than that, it was like me and Aaron every day and 3 friends and one dude. So.
Is it sort of like an independent standing building that you actually designed from the ground up, or?
No, we built in an old factory, so it's separate from other buildings and portions of it, And the B room is actually underneath apartments, so that was probably our main concern for, generating noise complaints was that B room. So, we're kind of careful about what goes on in there late at night, and,
Even though
it's pretty well isolated, yeah. But, it's just, you got to be smart about those things.
Yeah.
It's like if you're maybe going to generate noise complaints, don't work late.
And we got to build from the slab. I mean, we frame, I don't know if anyone's done construction, but we were basically starting with a gutted box, and we framed the entire thing on a 3-foot concrete slab up. So, we don't have to worry about the ground, at least.
Yeah.
2 cents from my perspective. You can't get far enough away from your neighbors. I'm in a commercial building on the far west side, and we don't. No one complains about our noise. Ours almost never complain. No, we never get complaints about our music leaking into their space. But there could be somebody. We have actually a framing shop in the building, and they're hammering in these tiny little brads, and they put the frame down, and they go tap, 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 tap. And 4 rooms away, 2 slabs, and coming down through the columns, I hear tap, tap, tap,
Wow.
tap, tap.
Yeah.
And so it's almost impossible if you're in close proximity to any sort of mechanical noise to really get it out of the facility. Real quick, a horror story when Masters first moved into the building. It was a printing building, big slabs, and there was a printing press, a printing operation above the facility. And everything was fine and good. These were modern presses, offset presses, and everything was, at home, but it wasn't particularly noisy, so we built, an appropriate amount of acoustic isolation. 5 months in or so, I literally recall to the day, I'm sitting with an editing session with Bob Clearmountain sitting next to me, working on either Springsteen or Bryan Adams or one of his, and all of a sudden, kaboom! Kaboom! And Bob shook, and his eyes were like this big. He goes, "What the hell is that?" It was like 40 tons something, had been dropped on the ceiling above us. Mm-hmm. We come running out of the room, and everybody else's door flew open. What was that? What was that? We went upstairs. The tech and owner went upstairs and found that the business had had a specific print run where they weren't going to use their 4-color offset press, but they were going to run their other mechanical press that didn't have cutters involved. So they had to stack up the paper and put it into a guillotine cutter. That boom was this paper cutter. Well, the irony, or the weirdest thing about it was you're standing next to it. I could have this conversation with you while this thing was going ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. All that energy was going down into the slab, into the column, and radiating off the column and around my room, because we'd never planned for that kind of energy to be in the slab, in the building. Mm-hmm. Crazy. I mean, it came close to closing Masterdisk for good. I mean, it was just so. The solution was we actually bought it. I wasn't the owner then, but they bought and installed a isolating platform to put the paper cutter on. And 6 months later, they moved out. We went out of business. But it was the only way we could operate in that building was to isolate them from the building. Crazy stories. We're not going away. If you've got some more questions, hang in. We do want to run the raffle before everybody takes off. So come on down with the raffle box. Well, I wanted to thank everybody. Great questions. Like I said, we're not going to take off just yet. The hangout afterwards is sometimes a lot of fun. Great audience. This was a great space. Really great kickoff to the Off the Record. And thanks for coming. Thank you.